Good morning. This is the welcome to the Advisory Committee on Plants and Animals of the Hawaii Department of Agriculture. This meeting is called to order on Wednesday, February 15th at 9:03 a.m. My name is Darcy Oishi, chairperson of the committee, appointed as a designated alternative if Dr. Helmuth Rog is not available to chair this committee. Before I get too involved, I have some housekeeping to address. If connectivity is lost and not regained in this hybrid meeting after 30 minutes, the meeting is canceled or postponed. The public wishing to speak, please keep your camera off and unmute. Raise your hand when you have something to present. And Stephen, who is graciously assisting us today, will help you provide testimony. Stephen, is there, and Stephen will let us, the committee, know if there's anyone from members in the public attending in person at the plant quarantine office, if they wish to speak, so I can call them forward. Any questions or concerns from the committee on how we're operating this morning?
None.
And I will remind that we have quorum today, so I'd like to note we will be, I will just be asking if there's any nays to motions. Let's see. Next up, we have introductions of the committee. Please introduce yourself with your name, title, and agency that you're representing. Also specify if there's anyone in the room with you. So I'll start with Rob.
Good morning. I'm Rob Hoff, State Protection Forester with Department of Land and Natural Resource, and I am alone this morning.
Grace.
Good morning, Grace Simmons, Department of Health, Hazard Evaluation and Emergency Response Office, Program Manager. I am alone in my office.
Tom.
Yes, I'm Tom Eisen, a planner with the Environmental Review Program of the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development, formerly with the program OEQC before we were transferred. Alphabet soup. I'm in a cubicle with nobody close by.
Thank you, Tom. And one day I'll be able to actually recite the agency you're with. Probably when it changes names again. Sam?
Aloha and good morning. I'm Sam Ohugan. I'm the Senior Scientist and Cultural Advisor for the Nature Conservancy of Hawaii on Palmyra. And I'll go to Pam.
Hi, good morning. I am formerly the Pane'ewa Recreation Complex Administrator at the County of Hawaii, which basically was being director of Pane'ewa Zoo. So now retired and happily just helping you guys.
Thank you for joining us, Pam. Welcome to the show. Introductions being done, we have some requests to be reviewed by the committee. Plant quarantine, your first request, please. Plant quarantine, Will? Or Jonathan?
I'm bringing Jonathan forward.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I think you folks can see me and hear me. All right, I see thumbs and head shaking. All right. Okay, good morning, everyone. So I guess in the interest of time, I'm actually going to be doing all three submittals, so I won't basically reintroduce myself every time. So My name is Jonathan Hull. I'm the acting plant quarantine branch manager. We have a request from the Division of Aquatic Resources, from the Department of Land and Natural Resources, to place the unlisted northern largemouth bass, Micropterus salmoides, to place it on the list of restricted animals Part A for ecosystem and fishery impact research for the Wahiawa Public Fishing Area. So this request, basically as a background, DLNR DAR provided a petition to the board last year in August, and the board took it up at their October meeting, and basically the board approved it. The placement would, on the list of restricted animals A, would make this organism eligible for importation for our government agency for research. This was precipitated by Act 223 SLH 2021 to enhance the fisheries of Lake Wilson, the Wahiawa Reservoir. So there are actually two requests from DLNR. This one for the northern largemouth bass, and for butterfly peacock bass, Cichla ocellaris. So DLNR is actually spending the majority of their time on that. We actually have the request going through review because that organism is already on the conditionally approved list and is going to be much obviously quicker in order to potentially import, because you don't need to go through the list placement process. Once that's done, DLNR will be focusing on this one, and then the actual request for importation and to establish conditions will come back before you folks. So this request is basically only to review the placement on the restricted A list itself. Obviously, it only creates eligibility. It doesn't actually allow importation, but then it gives DLNR the ability to come back and then obviously have a better idea of what exactly they'd like to do to present to you folks, and then to the board, obviously, to get a permit to import. That's it. I don't know if anybody has questions.
Do I have any questions or concerns from the committee?
Yeah, just regarding list A, Jonathan.
Okay, yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Rob.
Looking at list A, all of those purposes suggest some level of containment, and this is for introduction into the environment. Is there a conflict there?
Right. So our understanding is DLNR wants to do research first. And so their permit is obviously going to be in containment. And I think they want to do some feasibility studies like that, just to make sure that it, obviously once introduction does occur, and, as the DAR is the primary agency for, fishery stocking and stuff like that. They want to make sure that it's going to, not be worse than it is. And I think this is the choice that this is the path that they've chosen for this request. And it meets the requirements of the regs, so we don't have any issues with it.
Okay, so if they do their research and they decide, oh, this is a good idea, we want to bring it in and release it, they would have to come back and get it relisted.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification.
No, not a problem.
Jonathan, would that relisting be restricted B, or would it be conditionally approved at that point?
It could be both. There are species on the restricted B list, obviously like commercial production stuff like that, and that would be eligible. Well, let me step back. It's actually possible, because it's their statutory authority, and government use is a restricted A possibility. It could be like biocontrol. If they're the only ones that are going to be doing the release, they could just get permit conditions to do it. So actually, let me step back, Rob. I think list placement isn't necessarily a requirement. If DLNR is going to do that themselves and be the only agency doing it, they have that authority on restricted A. If they're going to start giving it to other people, because I think they do that with other fisheries, then they would require a list change. So sorry, that was a good point.
And Jonathan, my understanding from the submittal is permit conditions will be established at a later date for after this listing?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you have any other questions? Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second,
Do I have a second?
yes. Second,
And thank you. Any comments from the public? Any additional discussion from the members? Okay, hearing none, chair votes aye. Do I have any nays on this? No nays, motion carries. Thank you, Jonathan. Our second proposal.
Okay, right. So the second proposal is going to be from Kimberly Johnson from Corteva. And the request is to allow the importation of maize chlorotic model virus, a virus on the list of restricted animals Part A by permit for laboratory work and shade house inoculations by, Pioneer Hybrid, aka Corteva. And then 2, to establish permit conditions for the importation of maize chlorotic model virus, a virus on the list of restricted animal microorganisms Part A for laboratory work and shade house inoculations. Basically, Corteva is looking to import this particular virus, a single shipment, to conduct a study. The isolate that they're proposing to import was collected from Hawaii, was sent to the mainland, and is basically going to be, was purified and is being brought back for use. You'll notice in this submittal that there were a lot of CBI redacted portions, and Corteva has basically made a claim for that to protect their research and their personnel. There's a PQB note on page 2, basically explaining why that's there. They're basically going to be doing shade house inoculations, and the permit conditions are based off of similar requests for this type of work. Microorganisms on the list of restricted animals, list of restricted microorganisms, Part A, all require board review every request. So hence, this is why this is being brought before the committee. The folks, Kim and some of the researchers, are available for questions and comments from the committee if there are any. And all the subcommittee members recommended approval based primarily on the fact that this particular isolate is the one that's being the one that was brought in is collected from Hawaii. And I believe the 6 members that did respond all recommended approval. So that's it.
Thank you, Jonathan. Can I, Stephen, can you elevate Kimberly Johnson to panelist, please, so we can. Do I have any questions or comments from the committee?
Jonathan, I'm just curious, we typically, when we see a import request like this, want a little background on the facility, whether it has any required certifications or anything. How can we do that if that information isn't provided in the application?
Yeah, so they have provided the department with the site and the facility, and their processes, which they've laid out in the submittal, are things which we agree with to mitigate risk, obviously, containment, destruction, things like that. And again, their CBI claims that they've made Obviously we respect those. And then obviously if there's a challenge, they would have to basically defend those claims. So it is, I understand, a little bit tricky in that this particular request doesn't have as much information as the committee and obviously moving forward, the board has historically seen. The recommendation is going to be, your recommendation will be based very heavily on what the branch has seen. And obviously it's unfortunate Will's off today, but speaking to Will, who has been the primary contact with Ms. Johnson, there doesn't seem to be any major issues or concerns based on the particular use based and the facility and the in conjunction with the practices that they're going to be using. I hope that helps.
Is there any history or that you can speak of as far as just complying with basic procedures and safeguards that the applicant has demonstrated?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any issues with regards to any of the work that they've done. So yeah, at least from our standpoint, we haven't seen anything that would raise any significant concerns or flags with regards to this particular work.
Thanks.
Speaking of significant concerns or flags, I note that the virus committee took a look at it. Most of them approved without any comment. The comments that were made did not seem to reveal any underlying hesitations or concerns. So based on that and what you've told us, it seems like it's good at this stage to move forward with this, at least in my opinion.
I have a few questions for the applicant, Ms. Johnston. Who rendered the identification of the virus and what methodology was used? Yeah, you can unmute yourself and speak. Go ahead, Ms. Johnson.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
There we go. All right. Hello. Thank you for meeting with us today or letting us be part of your meeting today. In the room with me is also Dr. Scott Hoyklint and also Dr. Mark Young. They are going to answer your questions quick.
Sure. So in regard to how the isolate was collected and identified, that was done with our diagnostic labs. We have one diagnostic lab on Waialua and another on Kauai, but our main diagnostic lab for Corteva is here in Johnston, Iowa. But our diagnostic lab in Waialua sent a sample of suspect MCMV plant to our diagnostic lab in Johnston using our 526 permit for diagnostics, which includes MCMV. And once it came to our diagnostic lab, we confirmed it both with serological technique as well as MCMV PCR primers. We also confirmed that the sample did not contain any of the other common viruses that are found on the island. And then from that point, we moved it to a BSL-2 level facility where we maintained the virus on susceptible material, did mechanical inoculations. Then we would use that leaf material for some further investigations with MCMV within this BSL facility. And with the need for pure inoculum that we know is not cross-contaminated with any other viruses, we wanted to move this inoculum from our lab in Johnston, from the BSL-2 facility to Waialua for these experiments. And that would be done by taking that leaf material, packing it with buffer, and sending that material in falcon tubes with appropriate boxing and protection to the Waialua location where it would then be used for inoculations.
Can you introduce yourself for the record for the purpose of our transcript?
Sure. My name is Scott Hoyklin. I am the
Can you
North
spell that,
American.
please?
Sorry?
Can you spell your last name, please?
Sure. My last name is Heuchelin. Dr. Scott Hoyklin.
We would have never gotten that right. I'm glad.
It's German. And I have both a master's and PhD in plant pathology. I served as a faculty member at Iowa State University in their agronomy department, creating and teaching IPM and crop protection programs. And then from there, I moved from Iowa State University to Pioneer at the time, and have been and started off as their lead field pathologist. And now I run the entire North America pathology group, including our diagnostic labs, production of inoculum, all of our field characterization of diseases, etc.
Thank you.
And I have phytosanitary responsibilities, which obviously plays in here, phytosanitary responsibilities globally.
You made note in both the application and in your comments that you have a permit from USDA APHIS PPQ for interstate movement. Please verify if the permit stated in the submittal ending in 4098, if that is just for diagnostics or does include movement and release, or if that's a separate permit.
That permit is for both interstate transport and for use. It's valid until July of 2024.
Can you provide this committee and the Board of Agriculture with a copy of that permit?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. And then I note that there were some, the comments from our advisory members indicated that they were supportive of this work because of it's a local isolate. What is the typical chain of custody that you follow to ensure that this is the local isolate that was collected in Waialua as it went through all the processes in the Iowa lab?
So the sample went directly from our diagnostic lab there to Johnston, to our diagnostic lab. That material was sent overnight express. And then when we receive it in our diagnostic lab per protocol, we open the package in a type 2 bio containment hood and then examine the material to determine what type of analysis needs to occur with it. At that point, it was determined that these were indeed viral symptoms on the maize leaves, and the sample was then prepared for both serological and PCR analysis to confirm that it was indeed MCMV. And again, we also tested it against the other common viruses, such as MMV, which is also endemic on the island, to assure that it was a pure, that there was no other viruses in that material. From that point, it was transferred in a cart with double containment, about probably 50 yards to our BSL-2 containment facility, where it went through the vestibule and then into a conviron chamber with material that we had grown to be, that we know is susceptible to MCMV, and then the inoculations were done with mechanical inoculation using carborundum and buffer. And then likewise, collection of that material occurred in the BSL-2 facility, again was transported in a cart with double containment to the diagnostic lab. And from there, we were able to put it in our freezer in the diagnostic lab. And we brought that out periodically to assure that we can get good infections with frozen MCMV material from that BSL-2 containment center or containment room. And indeed, we are able to get good infectivity with that. So we know that it would work well for this particular use as far as shipping it back to Oahu and in particular to our Waialua facility.
Okay, thank you. Jonathan, did Plant Quarantine receive a copy of the federal permit?
I do not believe so. I'd have to check with Will.
Okay, and are there, this is to the applicant at this point then. Ms. Johnson, are there federal permit conditions relating to the release and use in the shade houses?
Yes, that permit is for release to shade houses.
Okay, and there's specific permit conditions attached to that?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
Do you have any other questions from the committee?
So we would be issuing permit conditions that are similar to the USDA permit? Is that an assumption?
Having not seen the USDA permit conditions, I'm not able to answer that.
Right.
Yeah, so Pam, so one of the things is in the permit conditions, there's a requirement that, they must comply with, all state and federal other regulations. So
Right.
the conditions that we would be obligated to enforce would be the ones that are contained within the submittal. However, the applicant is still mandated to comply with whatever federal regulations, regardless of the permits, which may exceed our scope of authority. So there's an assumption that having the permit, they are compliant. And obviously, if we came across a violation, we would refer it to USDA because that's not really our jurisdiction. But that's kind of a built-in assumption that the applicants will be complying with all other regulations, not just ours.
Okay, and we would be conducting a site inspection?
Yes, that's going to be done prior to the issuance of the permit.
Will that be held in conjunction with our federal colleagues?
It could be.
Okay. Do I have any other questions or concerns from the committee?
Yeah, I have a question on the logistical side of the thing. That upcoming federal inspection, is that already scheduled?
Not to my knowledge yet, no.
I see. So there is an opportunity then to coordinate the state and federal inspections to be concurrent. I like that idea.
I'm debating how I want to proceed, given I honestly would like to see the 526 permit. Committee, does anyone else have concern? Jonathan, can I, no, let's just proceed. Do I have a motion to approve or to say nay or anything? So I'm going to move to approve contingent upon the applicant's submission of a 526 permit from USDA for plant quarantines review before moving to the board.
I
I'll
second.
second that.
Okay. Any discussion? Oh, go ahead, Grace.
Can we give a time frame on the submittal of that permit so that, to keep this moving along? Maybe Ms. Johnson, you could provide us with the copy of the permit in a week's time. I don't know what the timing is for the process from here to go to the
I
full
can
board.
send it to Will today. I know he's out of office, but I can definitely send him that in an email as soon as we're done with this meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions, Jonathan? Does this suffice for plant quarantine?
Absolutely, crystal clear.
Any discussions from, or comments from the public? Hearing none, chair votes aye. Committee, since we have quorum, do we have, yes, Jody?
Sorry, so I heard Darcy moved. Was there any second?
Rob and Sam are vying for who gets second dibs.
Pick one, just pick one.
I think Rob was faster on the unmute, though.
I cede it to Rob.
So any nays from the committee? And motion carries. Thank you, Jonathan. Jonathan, our third submittal.
Okay, okay. Let me move some paper real quick, so I'm a little bit more composed. There's a lot of paper for this one. Okay, so the last request we have is going to be for review and recommendation on the proposed changes to Hawaii Administrative Rules, Chapter 472, entitled Plant and Non-Domestic Animal Quarantine, Plant Interstate Rules, to, among other things, implement the CRB quarantine, interim rules 22-1 to implement the CRB interim rule to quarantine, to implement quarantine restrictions for CRB and the host materials, to implement fees for inspections and for the processing issuance of permits, to establish authority to prohibit the movement of infested materials within the state, to include penalties for non-compliance, and make a bunch of changes for clarity, simplification, and grammar, punctuation, things like that. So the primary focus of this rule change is to implement or to make permanent the interim rule for CRB. That rule expires at the end of June. Going through this process, because 72 really hasn't, 4-72 really hasn't had I guess, for lack of a better term, a comprehensive review. We tried to take this opportunity to do as much as we can, and yet not necessarily impede the CRB, the rule amendment. So what the committee is seeing is, our best ability to try to get through all of the things that are in 72 and at least managing the existing regulations, and then trying to clarify some of the more important tasks, such as obviously fees and inspections. Oh, sorry, Jody. Oh.
It looks like Grace Simmons is gonna need a break, I think.
Is it
I'm
a problem?
sorry, I have someone waiting for me to sign a document. I will be right back.
Yeah, so maybe we need to take a break until she
Okay.
can come back.
Thank
How
you.
long?
So sorry, 5 minutes?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Sorry.
no, not a problem.
Thank you for catching that, Jody.
So I don't know, Darcy, you want to set a time to reconvene? Maybe then it's real clear for everybody. So if they show up, they're like,
Let's reconvene at 9:45.
thank you.
It is 9:45. Stephen, are we ready to go back live?
Yep, you're good to go.
Everyone here, Sherry, are you in? I'm gonna take her unmuting as a sign. Jonathan, are we recording now?
Yes, we're recording and open to the public.
Okay, thank you. Jonathan, please proceed. My
Okay, yeah,
apologies.
in section 2 of this request, it basically has a summary of all of the changes that are going to be made to 72. I think to note the change, some of the more I think more significant changes is the idea of the chief, which was the plant quarantine branch chief, has been changed to the SPRO. The requirements for inspection or the ability for the SPRO to stop sale of infested commodities. The ability to charge fees for permits and for inspections is now being included. The inspection fees is more codifying in the rules. There's an act, I think from 2010, that implemented the fees statutorily, so that's more of a cleanup. But up until now, permits have been free. So we haven't been charging people for permits because we had no authority. So this will be an opportunity to now charge for that service. The fees that we're proposing are the same as any other permits that we issue now, $20 and $100. And then obviously the final thing is to implement the rule on coconut rhinoceros beetle, to implement compliance agreements, to ensure that the regulated goods aren't moved inter-island without inspections or permits, and then to still maintain the on-island restrictions of host material to put, to slow the spread or the further spread of CRB on Oahu. It was sent to various micro subcommittees and the subcommittee on entomology. The entomology subcommittee members all recommended approval. There were some comments primarily on making sure that CRB suppression and management are maintained, so obviously maintaining that rule. And then the plant pest control branch, Ms. Janice Matsunaga, did have a lot of comments regarding specific language in the rules. PQB has added some responses to some of it, because some of it is, I think, are questions, not necessarily changes. So for example, in the definitions about compliance agreement, so 150AA requires movement to be by permit. So to address that the compliance agreement doesn't conflict with the statute, that's the reason why the permit is there. It's just to comply with that particular section. 141 does give the authority for a compliance agreement, but that's in the bottom of that, whatever the I guess that notation in the rules. So there's not necessarily a need to comply with 141. The idea of vegetative scraps, I think that may have been a mistake, because obviously vegetative scraps could have pests. So that is something that the branch is going to recommend for removal from the definition, as brought up by Ms. Matsunaga. The idea about hapu'u logs. So one of the issues with the rules is the rules don't have a requirement for non-propagated plant material to require inspection at this point. It's subject to random inspection. So this hapu'u log issue may be something that could kind of fall through the cracks. The alternative would be to either create a restriction potentially for Hapu in of itself, or to regulate LFA host material. I think, which is a little bit complicated in that it's like on everything that's in a field in Hilo that sits out, or maybe not just in Hilo, but in an infested area. It's probably something that's up for discussion, I think, further with regards to Hapu. The prohibition on the movement of infested material. The idea is for, I think for all intents and purposes, carte blanche. And the intent is to be able to put a stop to goods that are infested and are for sale. The rules are silent at this point. So the intent of this section is to give that ability to take action. However, it is confined to pests, and pests are defined by the board. And I think Dr. Gon did bring up a comment about the idea that the list of examples of regulated pests is, not exhaustive. And the idea is that pests are supposed to be determined by the board. And so this particular section, the definition of pest probably does need some changing, and the testimony from CGAPs, which you folks have received, seems to address the issue of things that aren't designated by the board. Technically, you don't have the ability to take action, and we'll discuss that, I think, when we get to that testimony. But their testimony does address that particular issue, to be able to give the SPRO the ability to take action on things that are infested, that aren't necessarily pests as designated by the Board of Agriculture. Let's see. So again, there were some comments about harboring, and again, obviously the intent is they're hiding it for all intents and purposes, and I think just being infested isn't necessarily a penalty. Let's see. There was comments about the inclusions of diagnostic work for restrictions on moving, transporting. We can add those particular terms. I think they make sense, and it makes it very clear that because diagnostics may not necessarily be research. I think when we were going through the rules, that was kind of the idea, lump them together. But to make it clear, adding diagnostic issues diagnostic work as approved purposes isn't a problem. Let's see. We have the lists of the particular species, and I think a lot of it is terminology issues, and obviously we can clean those up prior to getting it to the board. There was testimony from the Plant Pest Control Branch about potentially removing some of the pests, particularly those that are widespread, and we left them on from the standpoint of they are still pests, and being infested does give the SPRO the ability to prohibit movement. Just because they're widespread, I don't know if we want, or if the committee thinks that we should kind of lift the restriction and treat it as just an infestation and just subject to treatment prior to movement. We left them there, but I think that's a discussion that we can have with the committee about some of the more widespread pests. There was a discussion about there was a comment about adding in Fusarium TR4 into the banana restrictions. Obviously, I think that makes sense if to obviously prevent the movement of diseases, and I think we'll work with Ms. Matsunaga to I guess figure out the infested areas, and then I think what the prohibition will look like. But I think that makes sense in terms of movement. Obviously Darcy may have some comments on that one. And then the last major comment was the idea of basically repealing the rule on CLR, coffee leaf rust, or sorry, excuse me, coffee berry borer. And historically, the branch has taken a stance with regards to, I guess, lessening restriction, that it should come from the stakeholders or the industry, in that they're the ones that, the rule is designed to protect them. So they should be the ones that want to remove it. And, a lot of times industries may not all necessarily, see eye to eye. So giving the industry the ability to go through that process is, I think, what the branch believes is the best way to do it, just to ensure that there's no, or you're helping one side of the industry, not the other, all things like that, or a certain sector of the industry. And I know some of the larger associations are aware of the process to do a potential repeal, and I think they're trying to decide how to best do it, at least particularly for the inner island restriction, now that CBB and CLR are rather widespread. There were, I think we have one comment from Dr. Whalen, who referenced a standard place for nomenclature. We have that for the pests and insects. So I think we can, obviously include this reference. It makes sense to make sure that there's clarity in terms of nomenclature. And we also did receive 4 other recommendations from other micro subcommittee members. So a lot of them are on multiple committees. So instead of trying to have them respond multiple times, we kind of just lump them all together. So Dr. Wong from AI, basically, she recommended approval of the rule amendments. She didn't have any comments. Mr. Clements from Hawaii Biotech recommended approval with no comments. Dr. Rape from UH recommended approval with no comments. And then Dr. Trapito Rosenthal from UH recommended approval and had a comment. It was a short amount of time to look at a lot, but okay. I think to comment to that, it was a lot, and I think the branch, stretched it out to the very end to try to get as much changes as possible, so that we could get as much done at one time. And obviously we had to pull the trigger at some time, and obviously that's why we're at where we're at now. Regarding the testimony, there hasn't been any testimony except for the ones that you folks already received. All were in support, and obviously we got from some private individuals. We got from the CRB response team. We got from Dylan Adolfa. We got from HISC, BISC, and then the one I really want to go over is the one from CGAPS. Particularly with the idea of the modification to the definition of pest. So as stated now, the definition of pest is, basically any organism, any stage of development that's detrimental, potentially detrimental, as approved by the board. So the way the rules are written now, only those particular pests action can be taken on. The proposed modification by CGAPS includes other insects or diseases or pests, so that action can be taken outside of the statutory definition. And then it obviously allows, it ties in pest host material and things like that. So I think that particular proposed modification really helps to clarify I think the intent of the regulation to ensure that stuff isn't moving inter-island. And they did provide some additional comments about related material for sale, and the comments that they provided make sense. And then obviously I think the specific language, obviously the committee can speak on. And but for all intents and purposes, most of the requests that the proposed changes that they've provided make sense. And I think could be incorporated and do fit the rules pretty pretty well. So anyway, Jody.
Yeah, I wanted the committee to understand that the requirement for the board to determine what is a pest or not, that's in a statute. 150A2, where they define pest. So changing the rule that's contrary to a statute, you can't do that. You would have to change the statute. I just want the community to understand this is a rule amendment we're talking about. So we can't do more than the statute allows. Thank you.
I guess we're entering our discussion phase then. Jonathan, were you done with your presentation?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so let's jump in where I wanted to, which is the definition of a pest. So from my understanding of what you just said, Jody, thank you. The proposed definition from CGAPS might be exceeding the definition of a pest from 150A.
It
So
does.
it's page 2 of the CGAPS testimony, and it includes pest means any pest as defined in section 150A-2 Hawaii revised statutes, and 2, any plant, animal, pathogen, or other organism that is or may be injurious, harmful, or detrimental to the agriculture or horticulture industries of the forest of the state.
So that would not require a board determination because a statute requires that the board make the decision. So if it's going to say, you know, not requiring it by the board, then I think the fix would have to be to the statute, not
Okay.
a rule can't change the statute.
Okay, thank you, Jody. And for clarification, board decisions on pests can be found in Hawaii Administrative Rules 4-68 and 4-69, correct?
That's one of the places, yes.
And where's the other places, Jonathan?
It's actually in this section. There's the examples of
Yeah,
regulated
sorry.
pests.
That's the
Yeah,
obvious one. Can prohibited lists of animals on the prohibited list, can those be viewed as pests or no?
So I think that would be a bit of a legal stretch.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I take that back. If it is deemed a pest, like coqui frog, for example, obviously it's a pest.
Well,
I
but
think
that's
so.
our
I
statute.
Right. So I think from that standpoint, absolutely yes. I think if you're looking at things that are just prohibited, not necessarily. And then I think moving forward, creating another set of rules specifically to manage, I guess, non-domestic animals themselves should be created, in that this section is designed to manage plants, right? Plant interstate rules, so plant parks, things like that, not necessarily an organism itself. Obviously, if a plant is a noxious weed, or obviously that's one issue, but I think an animal in of itself really isn't. This section isn't quite appropriate for that. And then
Animal at this point, you mean basically a vertebrate,
yes.
or are you including insects also?
Well, I mean, right.
Clarification, because it's not clear in the way that the pest is defined. It says any organism that causes damage to agriculture, which includes plants, it includes vertebrates.
So in the context of this particular rule, right? This rule is you're restricting the host or the commodities that can be infested, or things that are infested with pests, not necessarily pests themselves. You have some kind of weirdness, I think, particularly like with CRB, for example, because the rule does restrict CRB in of itself. Obviously, if you're trying to take it inter-island, but I think long-term, for clarity, like if you wanted to move, CRB in of itself, there should be a separate set of rules that manage that particular organism in of itself for movement, because that has a different set of risks than the commodity that could be infected with the pest and then is moving. And I think the rules don't really cover it too well. We put it in, I think, for CRB, just because obviously it's, obviously nobody wants this thing to be moving anywhere within the state, even on out of Oahu. But I think longer term, I think it would be better to have our own set of rules, because to make it very clear as to where the line is between, pest being, the term pest being implemented. And I think to address, I think the idea of the definition of pest, maybe another alternative is to, instead of changing the definition of pest, particularly for the stop sale portion, is, we could change the language we could add 2 particular terms. You add an article infested with an insect, disease, or pest. And then you're not changing the definition of pest, but you're still enabling the authority to stop the movement of commodities that are infested. The statute does do that for importation. Things that are infested with insect diseases or pests. So I think it would be, because I think clearly the intent is to prevent the movement of things that are infested, not just the infestation of things that have pests by definition, or things that are determined by the board.
Jonathan, many people in the invasive species community consider invasive plants pests. Would it be helpful to say non-plant pests? Because things can be infested with invasive plant seeds, for instance.
Well, Rob, I interpret non-plant pests to include things like a non-plant pest would be, in our federal parlance, would be something like frogs or mosquitoes would be considered a non-plant pest also.
Right.
Yeah, no, but yeah, so Rob, I know where you're coming from, and I think the prohibition in this section to prevent the movement of pests would cover, like, for example, like noxious weeds, and
yeah,
and I think I think long term, having either a specific section or some other means to manage noxious weeds better. Actually, I want to say, let me see, I want to say, there were so many things that we changed in this chapter. I want to say that it is possible. I thought that we had something for the movement of noxious weeds in this section. Maybe I'm crazy and we didn't do it. Well, okay. Well, so that being said, I think to address Rob, your specific concern, we could, in the, I guess in subchapter 2, we're regulating, banana, sugarcane, CRB host material. We could add a section that would be, worded similarly to these other sections and restrict the movement of, to be very clear, noxious weeds, for example. Right, then so there's a clear list of plants that cannot be moved inner island except by permit, and then you have this list, obviously noxious weed list, which obviously is a different set of challenges in terms of revising it, but it's something that's very clear for everybody to understand as to what is regulated and it cannot be moved, and then it accomplishes the idea that those things are, can't be moved.
I'll point out that 472.15 includes noxious plants, specifically in the last item on the list of examples.
Well, I think that's great that you're interpreting this as inclusive of plants. That's a good thing. I'm curious as to, I'm a little bit troubled by all of the lists and the processes for these lists. I see HDOA staff chasing their tail in the bureaucracy a lot around this. And I'm wondering, what is the process for in this rule for adding an organism to the pest list? Is it just taking it to the Board of Agriculture, or does it have to go through the rulemaking process? Because I understand the noxious weed species is requiring a rule change. If we can just add plants by going to the Board of Agriculture and saying, we don't want this plant moved inter-island, then that's great.
That's a good question, to be perfectly honest. Chapter 71 has a provision about, I guess, list changes by board order, which is a little bit quicker than the full process. Obviously, there's not necessarily, I guess, for all intents and purposes, a list. I guess you have the examples of regulated species. And I'm just speaking in terms of, my a way to try to manage this. It's possible, and obviously, I'll wait till Jody either shakes her head no or yes, but the possibility of, create, we're getting into the weeds, but to create another section to manage the lists differently. I'm not sure about doing. I guess I'm just looking at it from the standpoint of how it's always been. There's a list that are in the rules. Rules require rule changes. Can you take them out of the rules and do it administratively? Does it have the same legal, force? I don't know. And if you do make a list within the rules, and then you create the ability to do changes by board order, which they do in 71, because that already exists, that would potentially, speed up the process. Obviously, you wouldn't have to go through the full public hearing process. And I think that's something that could be done. I'm just looking at what already exists. So I'm assuming that because it already exists, you could replicate it somewhere else. I hope that answers the question in a roundabout way. Yeah, I guess the long story longer. I don't know I'm not aware of a way to just board, you can do it. I don't know if you can just do it by board order. The board can just say you can't move it anymore. I don't know if that has the same force of law in terms of penalties and things like that. That's probably maybe a deeper question that we'd have to discuss, and probably might be outside the scope of, I think, this particular meeting in terms of trying to get it done.
Maybe a simple clarification, Jonathan, for the sake of this rule. How do things get on the list? It says as designated by the board. Is that simply PQ staff taking, creating a Board of Agriculture agenda item saying, is this a pest? Or is there a lengthier process involved? Because when I look at the examples, I see a list of incredibly outdated pests. And so it doesn't seem like it's happening very often. So I suspect there's a process there that's holding you up from updating that list, and that's concerning me.
I guess what's the best way to say this? Okay, so the rules I think were created in 81 is I think my understanding. I believe that these lists, or I haven't dug back through every rule change. I can't find it, but I believe that these pests were basically there at that time. I'm not aware of a formal process to, I guess, put them on. And because it's in the list of or the examples of regulated pests is by rule, the rule change has to be approved by the board. So therefore it's board approved. So right now, the only way that I see this list being changed is through the public process, because the list is a section within the rules. And then, so can you pull it out? And I think in terms of speeding it up, so okay, maybe let me step back. Maybe the best way to do it is we gotta kind of take a look at the existing rules, and then can we figure out a way to obviously speed it up to manage, obviously, an outbreak or whatever it is that needs to occur. You have these other, interim rule type things, but those are, again, short term. Can you create permanency in these rules, through the lists and that process? I think that's a discussion that we would kind of have to rack our brains about. I personally haven't dug too deep into it. I'm just thinking based off of the question and what I know to be acceptable at this time.
Jody, do you have any comments on this subject? On what the process would be to add on additional board-approved pests? It seems like it's all rule change bound to me, but I'm not the one with the JD at the end of my name.
Yeah, actually, I mean, and actually, I would like to talk about this more with Jonathan because he's got a stronger background in the rules. But Jonathan, is there a requirement that it go through rulemaking? Because say the board initiates its own motion and designates something as a pest, does it have to be listed?
Right, and again, so when you look at the definition of the thing, right, it's as determined by the board. So if they take board action, is that force of law? And I think that's the question to me. So like Rob said, we're gonna say that, you know, pest X is terrible. We want to make sure that it's determined a pest so that all these restrictions are enabled. Can the board take that up and go, yes? And once they say yes, I think it meets the definition, right? It's, you know, it is a pest that's detrimental to agriculture, environment, or whatever. And it's been determined by the board since they've taken action. So at that point, does the force of law work? Can you penalize somebody for, you know, moving it intentionally? That kind of stuff. I think, could we take action? I would say yes. Obviously, let somebody challenge us at that point, because I think it meets the intent. But can you stick all the penalty portions after that? I don't know. And
Yeah,
obviously, if it's in the rules, it's very clear. But anyway, I'm
I
sorry.
think Jonathan, you're right, because for 68 and 69A, it requires a rule change. The way those authorities are written, I would perceive that it does require a rule change. 72, it does not seem to be clear. So a board action may be sufficient. There's one way to find out, right?
Challenged by law.
Right, and then I think I guess in the interest of time, obviously this is like, literally, as far as I can tell, the first time that this chapter has been compiled. And I think it's, obviously tied in with CRB has, I think, created a different set of time constraints in terms of because obviously we want to make sure that CRB doesn't get lapsed. And I think that idea of, I think some of these more, I think, wide or broad changes, I think in terms of the process, managing the list of pests, I think we could go back and forth with it. And I'm not to say I want to just like kick the can down the road and just leave it on the side, but I think it's probably far more complicated. I think to come to a comprehensive solution that we know will work against trying to get CRB done. I think if this was just CRB, I think it would be very easy. We wouldn't be having this discussion. Everybody, I think, would approve because nobody wants CRB, and we'd be on our way. And I think, this other stuff, I think, is, kind of, I wouldn't say getting in the way, but, they're important things, but they're not as simple fixes, I think, as some of the other comments. And I think the idea of managing the pests as determined by the board, I think, is something that we can look at. And it's possible that the board action, as I think we agree, meets the statutory definition. Can that be enforceable? May not require any further discussion, because if it's deemed enforceable, yay, we have a process, and now we can start moving forward with that. And then if it's not deemed possible, then it requires, a rule change or whatever that may be, or creating rules to have a process to do that. And I think there's no question that that idea or that notion of managing, things that in of themselves are invasive does need to be done. And it's just, I guess, the kind of the right way to do it. And again, this goes back to this section being more for host material that are infested, not necessarily for the plant itself being regulated, even though we put it in because it's plant insurance rules. But anyway, sorry, I'm rambling.
No, I get what you're saying, Jonathan, and I definitely want to see this move forward, but it's also an opportunity for us to make any improvements in your rules. Rule changes do not come around often. They take a very long time. This is a huge gap in our biosecurity, and if we can't do it through adjusting the rules, I think we need to, talk about changing the statute so that the lists can be made more efficiently, because we continue to see the spread of invasive species with Department of Ag's, hands tied because they don't have the time to update lists, and we need to figure out how to fix that.
I agree with Rob here. I make that sound like I'm surprised that I agree with Rob. I'm not. I think this discussion is good and useful. And from my standpoint already, hearing from both you, Jonathan, and Jody, and sorry, Jonathan, I would actually probably weigh Jody's opinion a little bit more than yours. On the definition that a lot of these things that we need to, that this discussion is highlighting is the need to make changes to our statutory authority. And some of the more important changes that can happen within this rule would be reflected in what changes are made in our statutory authority within 150. And the definition of pest alone may be, may cause us to be able to revisit some of these issues that we're presenting here, and we can honestly probably take all day discussing. May actually be easier to resolve once we have a redefined definition of a pest. So I want to be cognizant of the main purpose that we're having this meeting, which is to discuss coconut rhinoceros beetle and that section of the rule change. I'd like to focus there. And I'm hearing Jonathan, that you're expressing concern that we will, if we entertain some of these discussions and package it as part of a substantive rule change, that we may lapse the interim rule. Is that a correct summary?
Short, yes.
Okay.
Okay. So I guess so for some context, the rule expires at the end of June. Obviously, we still need to go back to before the board to approve the public hearing, appoint a public hearing officer. Whatever changes that are made to the rules, whether it be at this committee or at the board, still need to be incorporated. And we're going to have to obviously get the governor's approval. We'll have to have basically the finalized rule, get that to the governor. We'll have to, for approval for public hearing, we'll have to do small business, we'll have to do the public hearing, we'll have to compile everything, go back to the board, we'll have the after public hearing statement and small business, then we have to get the governor to sign it. And then, file it to the lieutenant governors 10 days later, force of law. So that's a lot of things to do. And it all starts with going to the board. So the next board meeting is
2 weeks.
2 weeks from now, the 28th. Okay. So if we miss that board meeting, and I know there's a board meeting, the next board meeting is going to be in March. So you're losing 5 weeks in this already compressed timeline. And that's assuming that there's even a board meeting. Maybe there's no quorum and there's no board meeting, right? So you may lose 10 weeks. And at that point, it's very possible that it will lapse. So, at this point, it's trying to do whatever we can to give ourselves the best opportunity to get this done. And again, it's not to say that we're trying to force this. I mean, we stretched it to the very end to try to get all these things done. But again, you know, I mean, if in a perfect world, I would have just done CRB. We could have, but that's neither here nor there at this point.
Hey, Jody, do you concur with Jonathan's assessment on our likely timeline for getting a CRB specific changes executed?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Rule amendments are really complicated, and because of when I saw all of the comments that were coming in about all of the rule amendments for the whole chapter, I would be very shocked if we were able to make this before the current rule expires.
Okay. So Jonathan, if I may ask, CGAP's highlighted a concern on transporting coconut rhinoceros beetle host material within the state. And then states presumably subsection D is intended only to prohibit the movement of coconut rhinoceros beetle insects themselves, not CRB host material, which includes mulch, trimmings, and a variety of live palm species. Do you concur with their assessment?
Okay, let me look at what we have.
This is page 4 of their.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, I see their comment. I'm gonna look at the actual proposal. I look at it, it's the host material. You cannot transport host material within the state except it's not the beetles themselves. Maybe I'm reading it wrong. But
So what about the comment about routine landscaping throughout the state that involves CRB host material would be prohibited?
right, so that idea is kind of, I'm sorry, my camera's all black, but so that idea is kind of is managed through the compliance agreement. And I see, okay, I see. Okay, I see where the problem is. Okay, so actually I take that back, they're right. Because the prohibitions only allow the two things. It only allows by the department or agent of the department for monitoring or for a permit for control, eradication, and movement. They are right. I'm sorry. So you know, I'm almost wondering, to be perfectly honest, if this section is
between islands. Because then it would all require a permit.
Well, so I guess I look at D and E, okay, the section D and section E. So if you look at the rules themselves, so D and E, so E basically prohibits transportation. So section E, except as provided in F, which is the following one for the exemption. You cannot transport, receive, process, convert, or whatever, right? So because that's within, right? Within a CRB host material movement. Because, right, the intent is to, so I guess I look at the intent is right to use this to, okay, wait, let me think here. It's infested. Actually, you know what, I think okay, I'm sorry, I know how to fix it. Basically, what you need to do is it's transporting coconut rhinoceros beetle within this, it's from an infested area to a non-infested area is prohibited. I think that's the issue. Right, it's prohibited, except. Actually, no, but that still creates the problem. You still can't do it. Okay, why is this here? There's got to be a reason. I'm looking at I'm sorry, I'm looking at this incorrectly somehow. There's a problem with D and E because they overlap. And I
So,
think the intent is to manage transportation and because E does that. And
does.
it's just, I think we need to clarify when can each thing be done. So I want to say E actually covers D.
Okay, so.
From or within. There's a language issue.
Recognition that CGAPS has identified a problem. Why don't we continue the discussion? We can work out specific changes to the language at a little later that need to be made. Jonathan, just for your knowledge, Fusarium tropical race 4 is actually not present in Hawaii. I believe the comments from PPC are relating that based on how virulent and impactful a disease is, it is better to have the infrastructure in place in advance rather than waiting until it's here and then we're trying to make declarations. Well, literally, we have a monocrop of that's all highly susceptible to Fusarium TR4.
Yeah, the specific language for that is actually quite easy to add. Basically, you would basically in the 472.20, banana plants and plant parts. Actually, maybe you would add, and then you would add like another section about, to include that Fusarium race, the transportation of banana plant parts. I don't know if fruit is an exemption, but it's prohibited from an area that's infested with Fusarium to any other place in the state except.
Yeah, fruits would be an exemption.
Okay. So yeah, so I think adding it into A would be very easy to accommodate. And then obviously it would fit kind of the section. And then we can add language to make that intent. That's real simple.
Do we have any other questions or comments from the committee?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rob.
So yeah, just it kind of relates to what you're just discussing. So if there is a pest that is sort of cryptic, and the best way to prevent its spread is to just prohibit the movement of propagative material, does that require amending the rules specific to that species, like the Ohia quarantine, for example? Is that the only route for doing that?
So I guess it depends specifically, I guess, on I guess how we want the restriction to look. If the restriction is just inspection or not, and it's on propagative material, conceivably you can take immediate action because inspection is required. However, if there are things that are on top of that, treatments, some type of processing or mitigation or exclusion, things like that, there is no requirement to compel those things. We could try by policy, hey, you need to treat this before you move it. Well, you don't find the pest. Well, we're going to make you treat it anyway. You don't have, and then obviously I think that's a challenge because you have no authority to compel the treatment because you haven't found the pest. The rules give you the ability to compel regardless of whether the pest is there or not. So I think that's kind of where the challenge is. And if you're talking about something that's cryptic, it would be better to do something like similar to Ohia, where it's guilty. And let me step back. This rule is kind of geared with you're guilty until proven innocent. So the idea is everything is for all intents and purposes considered infested until deemed otherwise through whatever mechanisms we'd like. So depending on that pest, you would, put it in the rules, you set the restrictions, you set the commodities, and whatever they need to do. Once they meet those things, then it can move. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that was helpful. Thank you, Jonathan. Another question. So I see 472 4.5 is deleted, and that has to do with designation of infested areas. How does this impact existing quarantines?
And so it's just moved.
It's just moved.
It's moved to, I don't know where it is, but no, it's moved further down to, where is it? It's 472.10. The designation. So basically it just moved down just to kind of make the sections fit a little bit better.
I see. So, but
And,
nothing
yeah.
substantively is changed in how you designate areas. That's all the same.
It's actually, it deletes the requirement to notify industry themselves. There's a requirement for written notification to affected industries. So that part, I think that was the only thing that was deleted from that particular section. So it actually makes it a little easier to manage, because like, oh, I was on the industry and you didn't notify me, and could that affect the rule? Now it's just the public notice that everyone gets, in the paper or press release or whatever. It doesn't require that written notice to each of the affected groups. So it actually gives more flexibility to ensure that you're getting it done in the correct and timely fashion.
At one point, I recall there being a requirement that the board actually had to meet on that island that was designated.
Correct.
Changed? Is that removed?
I think that
still
is,
in there?
I think that was also removed as well.
Okay, great. That seems like a good improvement in today's day and age with Zoom calls.
Yeah, and I think the idea, I think obviously before the rules were amended, and was the idea of doing it through Zoom, and because you have access, there's no correct there, it doesn't preclude your ability to access, and because of that, I think the spirit was to ensure that the people who are affected were getting their voice heard, and clearly with technology such as this, that's not an impediment anymore. It's actually more open. Everybody can access anywhere at any time. So we felt that, yeah, that idea wasn't really necessary, and still meet the spirit of making sure that those folks can, not those guys on Oahu just quarantine and, we can't do nothing about it,
Okay,
So, yeah.
great. That's a nice little thing to clean up. Another question, this might relate to the whole definition and listing process, but I'm just curious, why are examples cited, but there's not an appendix with the list? Like, what is the point of these examples?
And again, I think so. It was trying to get this done in the timeliest fashion, but I think it's little change to kind of facilitate the movement. I think it would be cleaner, and I think Sam probably will talk to this, but I think, hey, like having headings and, making sure that all the similar types of things that are regulated are together, and having like a space for it, not like these examples. So the idea of examples, I think, was, again, from back in the 80s. And I think going back to the idea of, managing these pests, that particular section really, I think, is going to need a bit of massaging to, I think, make it fit better. It's just, we have it here. It's clear these are the lists. Let's just add these extra ones, and obviously, noxious weeds and things like that, to kind of just move it forward without making, I think, any more, I think, wholesale changes to like the overall structure of the rules, so that we can get it done. It was kind of you have to weigh the pros and cons. But I agree with you, Rob. I think the heading seems kind of funky. I mean, that being said, I think if that's the case, I mean, if we want to change, like, I think the title or the heading of that section, I think that's something that we can do to make it I think a little bit more, strong. But I think from the standpoint of the regulation, those things are designated as pests, we can take action.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just thought it was curious because if you're just citing examples, to me, that indicates that there's an easier way to add to it.
Right, and I think this is back to, I think that's for whatever reason, that's the terminology that they chose, way back.
I personally like that terminology of saying that they're just examples, because it provides for the larger universe of things that are not on that list, but are designated as pests. I would have just shortened the list of examples, but I also, it begs the question of where is the actual total list of all pests that have been designated. That was the question that I had written you separately. I'm happy to go with this because it's going to go through other processes, including public feedback and the like. So at that point, reorganizing the list into arthropods, other invertebrates, pathogens, noxious weeds, that can happen. That can happen at that point pretty easily. It's pretty easy to subclassify a list. So, and to shorten it for that matter, to have just 2 good examples in each category, and then say, and this is not exhaustive, which it already does.
That's a good idea.
But yeah, but I'm not proposing that we do this now.
Well, it sounds like something that probably could be done before it goes to the board. No, or no? Is that asking too much?
We can try. Well, so let me step back. So I think what we get to the board, I think in terms of the final form, I think we can have, I think, a much better idea. I have a much better idea based on the discussion. I think in terms of some of the changes, what you folks would like to see. And I think what's presented to the board is going to be very similar in this, like in Appendix A with the Ramsire. Obviously, like any changes, we'll probably color code it. I think that'll probably be the easiest way to see what changes were made after the subcommittee review or after the advisory committee review. And then depending on what the board actually approves, I think that's where I think kind of the meat and potatoes is going to be, because you need to present what's going to go to the public hearing to the governor to sign. So that's kind of where the heavy lift is, to make sure that all of those things line up, and and hopefully it's not too complicated. But yeah, no, I mean, can we do it? And that being said, at the public hearing, DLNR can say, hey, we want to do this, and the board can consider it, through the public hearing process. And obviously if it's substantive or whatever, that decision can be made. But those changes that's the whole point of the public hearing process, right? Everybody has the ability to have their say, and I think further changes can occur. We'll obviously have to weigh those against the timelines,
Right.
But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But if we can change it, hey, why not? I just won't sleep for like the next 2 or 3 days, but we can get it done.
We appreciate your sacrifice. We appreciate your sacrifice. And I'm with Rob in that this particular item that we're discussing can be an important step toward generalizing the whole way we approach biosecurity in the state. And I appreciate that a lot.
I got one more, if I'm allowed. Let's see, it's a definition, restricted area. I'm just curious whether there is any possibility of adding the department or its agents or some openness there to allow for people working under your authority. And I don't know how what defines that, but in this era of underfunded departments, we're leaning more and more on partners, projects that are managed through the University of Hawaii, like the CRB project? And does this language, limiting it to the department, allow us to utilize the full suite of tools and partners we use to respond to a pest, or can we expand that language a little bit?
I mean, I guess I mean, you could just change conducted by the, or maybe put as determined by the department. And then the department has the flexibility to say yes or no. And I think it still it gives the department still the control, obviously, to if it is something that the department deems necessary. But yet, if I think the idea of partners can do that work. Hey, we agree. I don't know. That's the way I look at it. Obviously, the rule was designed obviously specifically for the department itself, for PPC. It is my guess, and obviously I think Darcy probably can speak better to that. But if that's something that is necessary, I think that adding that, opening that ability, I think to me makes sense and would be an easy fix.
Yeah, I've seen wording in other sections of law that say the department is assignees or its designees, that kind of thing.
Any other questions or concerns from the committee?
I was wondering, maybe just in general, how the implementation of the interim CRB rules have gone over the past however many months it's been, since you're talking about making them permanent and moving forward. What's the experience?
From an objective standpoint, for the intended purpose of preventing the on-island spread of CRB, it has not been as successful as we would have hoped, but that probably has a relation to the timeliness and the beginning of the implementation of the outreach and everything else. From the standpoint of how it relates to our inner island controls for movement of material that can vector coconut rhinoceros beetle, I think it has been successful, but what we're doing is collecting negative data, right? So, which is what we want. We only want negative data. But I think inner island, it has been much more. I'll be honest, there has been some rough spots in that, but I think for the most part we've been successful in our execution and implementation. And thank you for the CRB response team and Plant Quarantine for working to address the gaps on that side. If the committee has no more questions, I want to, I note that we've had someone in the public had their hand, virtual hand politely raised for about 40 minutes now.
Yeah, Darcy, is now, I'm just curious, can we hear, I read through the testimony, but I'm wondering, was there anything in there and we missed, and can we hear from maybe the testifiers now in case we missed anything?
That's what I was going to do, Rob.
Sorry.
Yeah, so Ms. Easley, I see you have your hand raised. Would you like to tell us what's on your mind? You're on mute. Please state your name and who you're representing. Thank you.
My name is, thanks very much, Chair. My name is Stephanie Easley. I'm a legal fellow with the Coordinating Group on Alien Pest Species. Thank you to the Advisory Committee and the Chair for the opportunity to testify today for this oral testimony. I'm truly delighted to be here. In my role as the legal fellow and to CGAPS and support staff to the Prevention and EDR working group, I've had the opportunity to work on versions of these draft rules, and I'm very familiar with them. CGAPs. And first of all, I'd like to thank the plant industry and in particular the staff of the plant quarantine branch and the Attorney General's office for their leadership, expertise, and months of hard work to get to this point and develop these proposed rules. We're very grateful for all their efforts. I had some testimony I was going to provide, but in the interest of time, I'm going to try to abbreviate it. Rob, with respect to your question on restricted area, CGAPs proposes saying that any control effort identified by the SPRO could be considered a restricted area. With respect to the definition of pest, you can see what we propose putting in there in light of the AG's comments that you can't change the definition of pest. I'm wondering, would it be possible to use another term like regulated invasive species and have that include the definition of pest in 151A2 and then also the authority in 141.2? And that could be something that would not confuse the issue with respect to the statutory definition. And I think what the way I was reading this is, and Jonathan, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, if someone tries at this time under the current rules, Section 8 of Chapter Current 72 prohibits someone from transporting an identified pest, not just the plant material, but anything on the pest list, the 2008 pest list, or the 1991 examples of pests. So that's like already in there. But then also if someone was trying to move some hay from the Big Island to Maui and it was just completely infested with two-line spittlebug, which is not on that list, PQB would stop that, right? They would not allow that to be currently moved in the current situation. And so having the expanded definition like codifies what's actually happening now, lets the public know what's regulated and protects HDOA. That was the way I was reading that expansion.
So, oh, sorry. Yeah. So yes. So Stephanie, you are correct. So I think this goes back to, I think, the way that the statute is written with regard to 150A and the definition of pest. And for whatever reason, historically, we've been basically using how 150A is written, the implementation of 150A inter-island. And I guess technically, what we're doing is, I think, outside the actual authority of the rules with regards to things that aren't pests, two-line spittlebug being the example here. And however, and I think this is where it goes back to, I believe that there is a way to manage, to go between this. And I think, obviously, Jody's correct in that I don't believe we should change the statute. Let me say that. We can't add a definition that is more broad than the statute. I agree with that. Okay. Without changing the statute. That being said, can you work around it? And the statute as it exists now for import has pests, but it also has insects and diseases. It lists them specifically. So it says you can take action on insects, you can take action on diseases, and you can take action on pests. And I think for the sake of this rule, I think we were trying to make it as streamlined as possible, right? Use one term that matches everything. And I think we all agree that that would be the best way to implement it. But to manage the statute, the statutory definition of pest, and yet obviously I think the committee would like to see is the ability to take action on something like two-line spittlebug. Just adding the term, insect disease in front of pest, whenever pest is seen in the chapter, would maybe, obviously we'll have to kind of analyze it. There may be some sections where you don't necessarily, you only want to deal with pests, not necessarily insects or diseases. But I think if you just add those two words, insect, disease, or pest, basically every time you see pest, and then you can do the same thing for, I think, that one section with the pest host material, insect disease or, or pestilence material or an article infested with an insect disease or whatever, you just kind of repeat that word just throughout the chapter. It makes it clear that any insect, any disease, any pest, we have authority to take action. And that it doesn't affect the statutory definition. And I think it's clearly that's the intent, because the statute has this, for all intents and purposes, the same set of language for import. So why wouldn't you do it for inter-island movement? I don't know. I guess trying to manage, I think, getting it done and doing it legally. Anyway, sorry.
Jody, go ahead.
My other point, I think that I agree with Jonathan that I can take action. I guess to me, I'm thinking two-line spittle bugs might not be designated a pest, but I'm assuming it's either a prohibited list, not listed at all, or on some kind of restrictive list at least. And because of that, you can't be moving it around without a permit. And so even though, I mean, pet designated or not as a pest is not the end of the story. There's also the, the prohibited or unlisted organisms that would also be considered prohibited. And so we can take action that way too.
Yeah, so that is one way of doing it, and I think it should you find the pest, but I think when you look at the intent of the reg, I think it should be very clear that an article infested with a pest should be just, it is what it is. We take action, and then we can compel treatments and things like that.
Jonathan, in this particular example, right, what hay would not be something that we would be routinely inspecting?
That, which is a different set of challenges, but yes,
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. I just want to, I think what we're highlighting in this discussion is it's not the end of the story that it's not necessarily overtly listed or the pest definition is a little backing. But there are other processes to fill the gap, provided that we actually are engaging in an inspectional activity to make us aware that there's a problem, right? To address a potential inadvertent movement of a pest.
Yeah.
Okay. Ms. Easley, do you have anything else you'd like to bring up to this committee?
Yeah, I don't want to go on too long because I know you all have been here a long time. We would also like to highlight our strong support for new proposed section 7, section 72-5. This section sets out in one place HDOA's authority to stop a seller from offering pest-infested merchandise to the public. We note that this is something that has happened in the past. It's an ongoing situation, and there's current situations with places that are open to the public where people come and buy stuff that are infested with LFA and Kochi, and areas that do not have that right now that HDOA is trying to address, but they don't have the tools to do it. And this section would provide those tools. So we encourage the committee to consider, moving this at this time based on all the work that HDOA and the AG's office has done to get it this far. It could, always be refined later at another time. We make minor suggestions to that section. We suggest changing the heading so it clarifies that it's related to items available to the public, adding the word quarantine to clarify what HDOA can do, and address the limited situation where a vendor makes infested items available to schools or a government, but not to the public, like a contractor has those items. We already discussed the CRB, and then the last point is a very technical point, and I appreciate your indulgence on this. These amended rules are part of HDOA's biosecurity program, and a citation to the biosecurity program authority appears in one section, which is 4-72-6 of the revised rules. CGAPS asked the advisory committee to consider recommending adding that section as a section implemented for proposed sections 72-1, 72-2, 72.3, 72.4, 72.5, 72.9, 10, 15, 22, and 23. Because that, there are three separate authorities that HDOA has to regulate the intrastate movement of pests. And by having them all set out there, I think it's clearer to the public and to users what is intended. And with that, we have, as you know, a lot of other comments in our written testimony, and I'm here to answer any questions on those if anyone has any for me.
Do we have any questions for the testifier? Okay, do we have anyone else in attendance who wishes to provide comments or testimony? Okay, hearing none. I would like to, any further discussion at this point from the committee?
Yes, I have a point of discussion. If this committee decides to move ahead with this, I presume that it's going to take into account the comments that have been brought forward, say by Ms. Easley just now, and other comments that have been discussed today, and that what we see before us now is not going to be necessarily what goes to the board, but we'll incorporate those changes. Yeah.
As a point of order, I would like to take a break to actually get my head straight on what a motion would look like.
Do we need to, in a motion, do all of the points and changes that we've discussed need to be listed out? Has that been captured for the record?
Jody, do you have any comments on that?
It doesn't have to, I guess you could do it that way, list out at this page and line, add in this word, or you could say we would adopt all of the suggestions by, CGAPs, or, so long as it's clear what the changes to the draft document are.
Great.
Okay.
That's really appreciated.
Well, that would be a motion that would take forever, and by the time we're done, we would forget what the motion was. If I have no objections, I'd like to take a 10-minute break so we can get our heads straight together on a motion. Is that satisfactory to the committee?
That sounds awesome. 10-minute break. So reconvening at
11:15. We'll round it to the nearest thank you. Stephen, can we go on, have our nice mute thing?
Yes, everyone mute, and then I'll share the screen.
Committee, if you're on, can you turn on your cameras? Okay, Stephen, let me know if we are recording.
Yes, it's recording and we are live.
Okay, so thank you for allowing me to have a break. Not that it was a real break. So I would like to make a motion. Chair moves to approve the suggested rule change proposed by the plant quarantine board branch with the following modifications relating to restrictions for CRB, following the guidance of the recommendations of the coordinating group on alien pest species relating to 4-7223D and E, to make corrections needed to address the concerns of the coordinating group on alien pest species. Include the proposed language on Fusarium tropical race 4 as it relates to the protection of the banana industry. Corrections and additions for the example of pests, and to address the definition of pest to include insect and disease or pest as warranted by plant quarantine branch. Do I have a second?
Second.
Do I have any discussion from the committee?
Yeah, Darcy, on the corrections and expansions of the examples, was that referring to Janice Matsunaga's comments?
I'm referring to both.
Both
Both
Matsunaga's and
Matsunaga's
CGAP's?
comments and CGAP's.
So it would be including Janice's. I mean, we did mention at one point that maybe keeping things that are already widespread still has utility. And I know that was one of her suggestions. Do we?
I did not mention deletions, Rob.
Okay, great. Okay.
So Jonathan, to be clear, we are adding and correcting nomenclature. We are not deleting.
Got it.
Okay, and we're adding, we're adding also from CGAPs, but I would also like to add that we will run the taxonomy through plant pest control branch for the recommendations from CGAPs to ensure that they're proper. Any other questions or concerns from the committee? Any comments from, yes, Jody?
I didn't have a chance to look at all of them, but those are all designated by the board, correct? These are not new pests that CGAPs or PPC is.
They are.
Okay, thank you.
And that's okay, right?
Because the board would be basically making an approval of the additions, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Is there an opportunity to at the Board of Agriculture meeting to make additional suggestions on pests that might be included? And is that and that can include all taxa?
I don't see why I couldn't.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions or discussion? Stephanie, okay. So we have a motion, chair votes aye. Do I hear any nays? Hearing none, motion carries. Do I have, oh, this is my favorite one. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Who moved?
I have a second? Tom seconds, Sam first, Tom seconds. Then anyone dispute our desire to adjourn? Okay. then-
Awesome, gang. I really appreciated this meeting.
Okay, thank you all for participating, both the committee members and the audience members who I'm sure were sitting in rapt attention at our discussion. We are adjourned at 11:20 a.m. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aloha.
Thank you very much.